I should have known something was wrong when my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I zipped the dress. Not the emerald silk I'd saved for, the one that made my dark hair look like midnight and my skin glow despite everything. That dress hung in the back of my closet like a promise I'd never get to keep. Tonight I wore gray. Borrowed gray. My cousin Renata's dress from 2 seasons ago, let out at the seams to accommodate 7 months of pregnancy and still straining against my belly like it was ashamed of me too. At 29, I'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. A dress wasn't worth the argument. Neither was my dignity apparently. Not anymore. The Montreux estate rose from the Louisiana darkness like something that had grown there rather than been built. All Spanish moss and wrought iron, candlelight flickering behind windows that had watched New Orleans society devour its own for 200 years. I'd been here once before as a child, holding my father's hand while he laughed with men who mattered. Men who would cross the street now to avoid meeting my eyes. Tonight was supposed to be simple. 3 hours. One final appearance at the Belhaven Foundation Gala before I disappeared from the city forever. My family's remaining connections, what little Jack hadn't burned through, depended on me smiling, nodding, pretending the whispers didn't slice like surgical blades. 3 hours. I could survive 3 hours. My heels clicked against the cobblestone courtyard as a valet in a tailored jacket greeted me with a smile that flickered when he recognized my face. The Hunter girl. The pregnant one. The one whose fiancé had gambled away her inheritance and then told everyone the baby probably wasn't his anyway. "Miss Hunter," he said, recovering. "The party is already underway." The party. Not the gala. Not the event. The party. Like I was arriving late to someone else's celebration rather than a charity function my grandmother had helped establish 40 years ago. That should have been my first warning. I followed the sound of orchestral music through the garden, past jasmine heavy with evening perfume and oak trees older than the nation. The ballroom occupied the estate's east wing, all gilt mirrors and crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across faces I'd known my entire life. Faces that turned away when I entered. Conversations that paused, then resumed at lower volumes. 200 people easily, old Louisiana money and new tech fortunes mingling in designer labels and heirloom diamonds, and not one of them met my gaze. I pressed my palm against my belly where my daughter kicked. Soon, I told her silently. Soon we'll be gone from here. Then I saw him. Jack Bass stood near the champagne fountain, swaying slightly, holding court with a circle of men who used to respect my father. Men who had attended his funeral. Men who had watched Jack systematically dismantle everything my family had built and done nothing because debt was contagious and they didn't want to catch it. He'd gained weight since I'd last seen him. Bloated from drinking, his tuxedo straining across his gut, his face ruddy and his eyes already glazed despite the early hour. He was laughing at something, that particular laugh he used when he was performing cruelty and wanted an audience. I should have turned around. Should have walked back through the garden, found the valet, and driven away before whatever was coming could find me. But pride locked my knees in place. I wouldn't run. Not in front of 200 witnesses. Not from him. "Ladies and gentlemen." Jack's voice cut through the orchestral arrangement like breaking glass. He raised his champagne flute, and the crowd fell silent with the particular anticipation of people who knew blood was about to be drawn. The joke of the evening has finally arrived. Every eye in the ballroom turned to me. Jack stumbled toward me, weaving between guests who parted like water around a stone. His smile was sharp and mean, the same smile he'd worn the night he told me my father's life insurance wouldn't cover his debts. The same smile he'd worn when he'd explained that my grandmother's jewelry had already been sold. "Look at her," he announced, gesturing at my belly with his champagne. 7 months pregnant and still trying to trap a man with a baby that could be anyone's. He laughed and a few voices laughed with him. Nervous, eager, grateful it wasn't them being sacrificed tonight. "I mean honestly, Allison. Did you really think showing up in that, what is that, a tablecloth, would make anyone forget what you are?" The words landed like physical blows. My vision blurred. My throat closed. My hand found my belly again, protecting my daughter from hearing, from knowing, from ever understanding what her father really was. "What am I, Jack?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. Enlighten everyone. Desperate. He swirled his champagne, playing to his audience. Pathetic. A gold digger who bet on the wrong horse and lost. He leaned closer, close enough for me to smell the bourbon beneath the champagne. Your father would be so proud. 3 generations of hunters, and you ended the line by spreading your legs for. The temperature dropped. I felt it before I understood it. A cold that had nothing to do with air conditioning, that settled into the marrow of my bones and made the champagne in Jack's glass crystallize at the edges. The crowd felt it too. Conversations died mid-syllable. Laughter strangled in throats. Even Jack stopped, his cruel smile faltering as something ancient and wrong moved through the room. He emerged from the shadows near the east entrance like he'd been part of them. Tall, impossibly tall, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on a Roman coin or a devil's altar. His suit was black with thin gold pinstripes, impeccably tailored to shoulders that seemed designed to carry the weight of centuries. A gold pocket square caught the candlelight. And his eyes. His eyes found Jack Base, and something behind them moved. Something old and hungry and absolutely certain of its own power. You mistake me, the stranger said softly. His voice carried without rising. Every person in that ballroom heard him perfectly, as if he'd spoken directly into their ears. He walked toward us, and the crowd didn't part for him. They pressed back as if proximity itself was dangerous. His gaze never left Jack, and Jack began to tremble. I came here tonight specifically for her. He stopped beside me. Close enough that I could feel the cool radiating from his skin. Close enough that his presence blotted out the chandeliers, the whispers, the 200 witnesses who had watched my humiliation and done nothing. Tell me, he said, still looking at Jack but addressing the crowd, does New Orleans society always allow drunk men to abuse pregnant women? Or is Miss Hunter simply expected to bear the lies of a man who sold her family's legacy to cover gambling debts he accumulated at tables owned by my associates? Jack's face went white. Who the hell are? I know exactly how much you owe. I know to whom. I know about the Hunter property on St. Charles you used as collateral. I know about the jewelry. I know about the insurance money you embezzled while Allison's father was still warm in his grave. Each sentence landed like a blade. The crowd had gone completely still. Jack's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The stranger finally turned to look at me. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, shot through with something that might have been gold. This close I could see a scar beneath his left cheekbone, faint and silver, and his jaw was sharp enough to cut. He was beautiful in the way hurricanes were beautiful. In the way fire was beautiful. He extended his hand toward me. Palm up. Waiting. You don't belong to this moment, he said softly. Come. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories to you, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to the story. I didn't take his hand. Not because I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being screamed to grab hold of this stranger and let him pull me out of the wreckage of my life. But I'd spent 2 years reaching for Jack Base whenever I was drowning, and all he'd ever done was push me deeper underwater. I don't know you, I said. Something flickered in those whiskey-colored eyes. Not offense. Something closer to appreciation, like I'd passed a test he hadn't expected me to take. No, he agreed. You don't. His hand remained extended. Patient. Certain. As if he had all the time in the world to wait for my decision, and perhaps he did. Around us, the ballroom had transformed into a theater of frozen aristocrats. No one moved. No one whispered. Even Jack seemed paralyzed, his ruddy face cycling through shades of white I hadn't known human skin could achieve. The men who had been laughing with him moments ago had melted into the crowd, suddenly fascinated by champagne flutes and wall sconces and anything that wasn't the scene unfolding at the room's center. You. Jack's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the bravado that had carried him through years of cruelty. You can't just walk in here and make accusations. Do you have any idea who these people are? Who I am? The stranger finally looked at him again, and I watched Jack flinch like he'd been struck. I know precisely who you are, Mr. Bass. His voice remained soft, conversational, almost gentle. You're a man who inherited nothing, earned nothing, and contributed nothing to the city that tolerated you solely because of the woman whose family name you were borrowing. He took a single step toward Jack, and Jack stumbled backward into a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Crystal shattered. Canapés scattered across the marble. No one moved to help clean it up. I know you lost $47,000 at the Crescent tables last March. I know you covered it by selling Allison's grandmother's pearls, the ones her father gave her on her wedding day. I know you told Allison they'd been stolen. Another step. Jack retreated again, his back nearly against the champagne fountain now. I know about the life insurance policy. I know how quickly you accessed those funds. I know what you told the adjusters about the circumstances of Reginald Hunter's death. The crowd rippled with whispered shock. My father's death. The car accident that had seemed so straightforward, so tragic, so convenient for the man who'd been bleeding our family dry for years. My knees went weak. The stranger continued without raising his voice, each word precise as a surgical instrument. I know you've been telling everyone the child isn't yours because you've already calculated that child support would interfere with your current arrangement. I know about the arrangement. I know her name, her address, and exactly how much of Hunter money you've funneled into her accounts over the past 18 months. A woman near the back of the crowd gasped. I recognized her, Francine Bellamy, society columnist for the Picayune. Her phone was already in her hand. So yes, Mr. Bass. The stranger stopped, close enough now that Jack had to crane his neck to meet his eyes. I know who you are. The more relevant question is whether you know who I am. Jack's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish drowning in air. Because I am the man who holds the notes on every property you've used as collateral. I am the man whose associates run the tables where you've hemorrhaged money for the past 3 years. I am the man who could, with a single phone call, ensure that you never work in this city again, that no door opens for you, that no hand extends to help you, that the name Jack Bass becomes synonymous with everything New Orleans despises. He smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Not because it was cruel, because it was patient. Because it suggested he had been waiting for this moment, planning it, savoring the anticipation of it for longer than I could possibly understand. But I won't make that call tonight. The stranger turned his back on Jack. A dismissal so complete it was almost physical. Tonight, I have other priorities. He faced me again. His hand was still extended, still waiting. In the crystalline silence of that ballroom, I could hear my own heartbeat. Could feel my daughter shifting restlessly, responding to my fear or my hope or whatever impossible thing was happening in my chest. I'm offering you a choice, he said quietly, so quietly I wasn't sure anyone else could hear. You can stay here, endure the rest of this evening, and leave New Orleans tomorrow as you planned. No one will stop you. No one will help you, but no one will stop you. Or you can come with me. And I will tell you why your family's destruction was never random. Why your father really died. And why your daughter, his eyes dropped to my belly for just a moment, is more valuable than you can possibly imagine. My hand moved before my mind could catch up. My fingers touched his palm, cool, impossibly smooth, strong in a way that felt like grabbing onto bedrock. I don't even know your name, I whispered. His fingers closed around mine, gentle and absolute. Vesemir Kahir, he said. And you, Allison Hunter, are finished being the joke of anything. He led me toward the exit, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea before Moses. If Moses had been a predator and the sea had been terrified of being devoured. I didn't look back at Jack. Didn't look at the faces of people who had watched my humiliation and done nothing. I looked only forward at the broad shoulders of the stranger who had just dismantled my ex-boyfriend without laying a finger on him. And I wondered what kind of monster I had just agreed to follow into the dark. The Louisiana night hit me like a wall of warm velvet, humidity and jasmine and the distant rot of the bayou beneath it all. I pulled my hand free of Vesemir's grip the moment we cleared the ballroom doors, stumbling toward the garden's edge where wrought iron benches crouched beneath oak trees that had witnessed centuries of secrets. I need air, I managed. Not a savior. He didn't argue. didn't try to take my hand again. He simply followed at a distance that felt calculated, close enough to catch me, far enough to let me pretend I was choosing this. The garden stretched into shadows, paths winding between hedges sculpted into shapes I couldn't quite identify in the darkness. Spanish moss hung from branches like funeral shrouds, and somewhere nearby, a fountain burbled with the kind of peaceful indifference that made me want to scream. My daughter kicked hard against my ribs, protesting the adrenaline flooding my system. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. But the world had started tilting. The cobblestones beneath my feet seemed to shift like the deck of a ship, and the jasmine scent that had seemed romantic moments ago now cloyed in my throat, too sweet, too thick, suffocating. I felt myself falling before I understood it was happening. Arms caught me, cool and impossibly strong, like being cradled by marble that had decided to move. I was aware of being lifted, of my cheek pressed against fabric that smelled like old libraries, and something darker, something that made some ancient part of my brain whisper danger even as my body went limp with exhaustion. I have you. Vesemir's voice came from very far away. I have you, Allison. I ride, I mumbled, the words slurring together. Came with Jack's friend, can't. I'll take you home. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him I didn't need his help, didn't want his charity, didn't trust men who appeared from shadows with convenient solutions to impossible problems. But consciousness was slipping through my fingers like water, and my daughter had finally stopped kicking, and somewhere in the distance I heard a car door open. The last thing I registered before the darkness took me was Vesemir's voice, soft and certain. You're safe now. Sleep. I woke to silk sheets and the smell of beeswax candles. The ceiling above me was coffered wood, dark and gleaming, older than anything in my family's house had ever been. Crown molding carved with symbols I didn't recognize. A crystal chandelier casting fractured light across walls papered in deep burgundy. This was not my apartment. I sat up too fast and the room spun. A hand pressed gently against my shoulder. Warm this time, human warm, guiding me back against pillows that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Slowly, Cher. The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s, dark-skinned and elegant, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a complicated twist. She wore all black, simple, expensive, the kind of clothes that whispered money without shouting it. The little one doesn't appreciate sudden movements. My hands flew to my belly. Still round. Still there. My daughter kicked in response, annoyed at being jostled. Where am I? My voice came out raw. Who are you? How long? You're in the Kahir estate. I'm Margot. You've been asleep for approximately 4 hours. The woman moved to a side table, pouring water from a crystal pitcher. And before you ask, no, nothing improper occurred. I attended to you myself. Changed you into something more comfortable. She gestured at the soft cotton shift I was wearing. Your dress is being cleaned. The Kahir estate. I took the water she offered, suddenly aware of how desperately thirsty I was. Vesemir Kahir. The same. And you're what? His housekeeper. Something flickered across Margot's face. Amusement maybe, or something darker. I am his steward. I manage his household and his affairs. I have done so for a very long time. The door opened before I could ask what a very long time meant. Vesemir entered like he owned the air itself. Which, given that this was apparently his estate, perhaps he did. He'd removed his jacket, rolled his sleeves to reveal forearms that looked carved from pale stone. In the candlelight, without the chaos of the ballroom, I could see him properly for the first time. He was beautiful. Terrifyingly beautiful. The kind of beauty that belonged in paintings or nightmares, too perfect to be real, too still to be natural. You're awake, he said. Good. We have much to discuss. You could start by explaining why you kidnapped me. I brought you somewhere safe when you collapsed from exhaustion and stress. Kidnapping implies intent to harm. He settled into a chair across from my bed, crossing one leg over the other with the ease of someone who had never been refused a seat in his life. I have no intention of harming you, Allison. Then what do you intend? Margot slipped silently from the room, closing the door behind her. The soft click of the latch sounded impossibly loud. Vesemir studied me for a long moment. Those whiskey eyes caught the candlelight and threw it back wrong. Too bright, too deep, with something moving in their depths that made my breath catch. I intend to tell you the truth, he said finally. Which is that I am not human. That the world you think you know is a thin veneer over something much older and much more dangerous. And that your child, your daughter, carries something in her blood that makes you both extremely valuable to certain factions who would not ask permission before taking what they want. I stared at him. Then I laughed. It came out high and sharp and slightly hysterical, the laugh of a woman who had endured too much absurdity in one evening and had finally broken. You're not human. Right. And I suppose Margot is… what? A werewolf? A ghost? Am I supposed to believe? Margot is a vampire. As am I. As are the 12 others who currently patrol this estate's perimeter. He said it calmly. Matter-of-factly. Like he was explaining that the sky was blue or that water was wet. Vampires. My laughter died in my throat. You're telling me vampires are real. I'm telling you the supernatural world has existed beneath the surface of human society for millennia. New Orleans has always been one of its centers. The French Quarter, the cemeteries, the bayous. Why do you think this city has the reputation it does? He leaned forward slightly. Your grandmother knew. She had the sight, the ability to perceive what exists beyond the veil. Your father suspected. And your daughter. His eyes dropped to my belly and something hungry moved behind them. Your daughter inherited that bloodline and more. He's a key, Allison. A key to doors that have been sealed for 1,000 years. And there are those who would kill you both to possess her. I was off the bed before I knew I'd moved, bare feet hitting cold wood, one hand pressed protectively over my stomach. I want to leave. No. I don't care what you think you know about me or my family. Then leave. Vesemir didn't move. Didn't try to stop me. The door isn't locked. Walk out. Return to your apartment, gather your belongings, flee to whatever city you plan to disappear to. I stared at him, then moved toward the door. My hand found the handle. It turned easily. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, elegant, empty, except for the figures I could see through the tall windows. Figures moving across the grounds with inhuman speed. Figures whose eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it back like animals. The Valdres Coven knows what you carry, Vesemir said from behind me, his voice soft. They've known longer than I have. Jack Base was paid to destroy you, to isolate you, ruin you, ensure you had nowhere to turn when they came for you. Stay and I protect you both. Leave. He paused. And I cannot guarantee anything. I stood in that doorway, my hand on the frame, watching monsters patrol the darkness outside. My daughter kicked again, once, twice, insistent. And I realized with a cold certainty that settled into my bones, that I had walked out of one trap and directly into another. The only question was which cage would keep us alive. 1 week. I gave myself 1 week to figure out whether Vesemir Kahir was my salvation or simply a more elegant form of destruction. 7 days to test the boundaries of my gilded cage, to gather information, to find a way out that didn't involve walking past creatures who could tear me apart before I took 3 steps. The suite he'd given me was beautiful. 3 rooms on the estate's 2nd floor. A bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in cream silk, a sitting room with bookshelves climbing to the ceiling, and a private bathroom with a copper tub large enough to swim in. Fresh flowers appeared each morning. Meals arrived on silver trays, prepared by a chef I never saw, tailored to pregnancy cravings I hadn't mentioned to anyone. I tested every window, every door. The sitting room opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens, but the drop was 30 feet and the grounds below were never empty. The bedroom window faced east toward the bayou, where shadows moved at irregular intervals. The bathroom had no windows at all. On the 2nd day, I found the servants' staircase behind a panel in the hallway. It led to the kitchens, where Margot was waiting with a cup of herbal tea and an expression that suggested she'd expected me to find it eventually. The back entrance is through the pantry, she said, not unkindly. It opens onto the herb garden. The herb garden is patrolled by 3 guards between midnight and dawn, 2 between dawn and dusk. I took the tea. It tasted like chamomile and something sweeter I couldn't identify. Why tell me? Because you'll feel better knowing you've mapped the exits. She returned to whatever she'd been doing before I'd arrived, sorting through correspondence on heavy cream paper, each envelope sealed with dark wax. And because the master prefers guests who understand their situation clearly rather than those who harbor delusions of escape. Guests. Not prisoners. Not hostages. Guests. I learned to navigate the estate's rhythms over the following days. Breakfast appeared at 8. Lunch at 1. Dinner at 7, always in the small dining room adjacent to Vesemir's study, always with the vampire king himself seated across from me. Those dinners became lessons. The Southern Territories extend from the Florida Panhandle to the Texas border, Vesemir explained on the third night, carving rare steak with surgical precision. New Orleans is our capital such as it is. I've held this seat for 400 years. 400 years. I pushed roasted vegetables around my plate, appetite fleeting. You don't look a day over 35. 32 technically. That was my age when I was turned. Something flickered across his features. Old pain quickly buried. In 1623. By a woman who believed she was saving my life. Was she? In a manner of speaking. She was also condemning me to watch everyone I loved grow old and die while I remained unchanged. He set down his knife and fork with careful precision. Immortality is not the gift humans imagine it to be. I filed that information away with everything else I was learning. That Vesemir's rule was considered moderate by vampire standards. He did not hunt humans for sport, did not permit his subjects to kill indiscriminately, maintained treaties with the human authorities who knew what lurked beneath their city's surface. That this moderation had earned him enemies on the Vampire Council, elders who considered mercy weakness and who had been waiting centuries for an excuse to challenge his throne. That I, apparently, might be that excuse. Your grandmother was what we call a seer, Margot told me on the 5th day, settling into the chair across from mine in the library. She'd taken to visiting in the afternoons, ostensibly to ensure I had everything I needed, actually to answer the questions I couldn't bring myself to ask Vesemir directly. The ability to perceive supernatural creatures, to sense magical energies. It's rare in humans. Rarer still for it to pass through bloodlines. My grandmother read tea leaves and talked to her dead sisters. I remembered her kitchen, the smell of chicory coffee, the way she'd sometimes look at empty corners like someone was standing there. Everyone said she was eccentric. Eccentricity is how seers survive in a world that doesn't believe in them. Margot's dark eyes held something like sympathy. Your father inherited a weaker version. Enough to sense danger, not enough to understand it. And your daughter. Her gaze dropped to my belly. The pregnancy activated dormant elements in your blood. Your daughter will be born with the full gift, and more. The Valdres Coven believes she is the key to something called the Crimson Threshold. A gateway sealed 1,000 years ago, containing... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Power. The kind of power that could reshape the supernatural world entirely. Could. Or would. The prophecy is unclear. They always are. Margot stood, smoothing her black skirt. What is clear is that the Valdres will not stop hunting you. They paid Jack Base to isolate you, to destroy your support systems, to ensure you had nowhere to turn when they finally came. The Master intercepted you first. Whether that makes him your savior or simply a different kind of predator. She left the sentence unfinished. On the 6th night Jack came. I heard him before I saw him. That voice I'd listened to for 2 years, slurred and desperate and ugly with rage. I moved to my bedroom window without thinking, pressing my palm against the cool glass. He stood at the estate's iron gates, gripping the bars like a prisoner begging for release. His tuxedo from the gala was gone, replaced by wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt stained with something dark. His face was bloated, his eyes wild. Allison. His voice cracked across the manicured grounds. I know you're in there. You can't hide from me. That's my baby, you hear me? My baby. You don't get to. Vesemir appeared at the gates. I didn't see him approach. One moment the path was empty, the next he was there, separated from Jack by nothing but iron bars and the vast gulf between what they were. They spoke. I couldn't hear the words from this distance, But I watched Jack's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Rage to fear to desperation to something that looked almost like recognition. Vesemir never raised his voice. Never gestured. Simply stood with his hands clasped behind his back while Jack crumbled. When it was over, Jack stumbled backward, nearly falling, then turned and ran toward a battered sedan I didn't recognize. The car peeled away, taillights disappearing into the Louisiana darkness. Vesemir looked up at my window. He couldn't possibly see me from that distance. The glass was dark, the room behind me lit only by candles. But his gaze found mine anyway, and something passed between us. Acknowledgement. Understanding. The recognition that we had both just watched the final death of something that had been rotting for a long time. What did you say to him? I asked at dinner the following evening. The truth. Vesemir poured wine he wouldn't drink, a gesture of normalcy I'd come to appreciate. That his remaining assets have been seized to cover debts he cannot escape. That his remaining friends have been informed, in detail, of his betrayal of your family. That his future in New Orleans is finished. You destroyed him. He destroyed himself. I simply ensured everyone knew about it. I should have felt something. Satisfaction perhaps, or vindication. The man who had ruined my life, who had stolen my family's legacy, who had publicly called me a joke, he was finished. Broken. Erased from the only world he'd ever known. Instead I felt nothing. Jack Bass had become irrelevant, a footnote in a story that had grown far larger than either of us. What I did feel, watching Vesemir across the candlelit table, was something far more dangerous. Gratitude. Trust. The terrifying beginning of something I had no name for. I was starting to feel safe with the monster. And that, I knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. The summons arrived on the 8th day. I watched from the library window as a black car pulled through the estate gates. Sleeker than Vesemir's vintage Bentley, modern and aggressive, like a predator that had traded elegance for efficiency. The vampire who emerged wore a gray suit that probably cost more than my cousin's borrowed dress. His silver hair swept back from a face that looked carved from contempt. Counselor Theron Ashford, Margot said from behind me, her voice carefully neutral. He sits on the Vampire Council. He has opposed the Master's rule for 3 centuries. What does he want? To know why a pregnant human is living in the Kahir estate. She moved to stand beside me, watching the counselor ascend the front steps with the unhurried pace of someone who believed time existed for his convenience. The supernatural world runs on tradition and precedent. Share. A vampire king taking a human under his protection, formal protection, is neither traditional nor precedent. Formal protection? The Master declared it this morning, before the entire council via written decree. Margot's expression remained unreadable. You are now officially under the aegis of the Southern Throne. Any attack on you is an attack on him. Any insult to you is an insult to his crown. My hand found my belly, where my daughter had been restless all morning. That sounds like it makes me more of a target, not less. It does both. Margot turned away from the window. The Master requests that you remain in your suite until the counselor departs. For your safety and his peace of mind. I stayed. Not because I was obedient, but because I'd learned enough over the past week to understand that vampire politics operated on rules I didn't yet comprehend. Vesemir was protecting me. The least I could do was not make that protection harder than it needed to be. The counselor left 3 hours later. His car pulled away with the same aggressive energy it had arrived with, and that night at dinner, Vesemir looked older than I'd ever seen him. Not physically. His face remained unchanged, that terrible beautiful mask of 32 years frozen in time, but something in his eyes had aged. What did he want? I asked. To remind me that humans are fragile. That protecting one is a weakness my enemies will exploit. Vesemir poured wine he wouldn't drink. To suggest, in terms that were technically polite, that I am gambling my throne on a woman who will be dead within a century regardless of what I do. Charming. Theron has never understood the appeal of humans. He was turned young, 17, during the fall of Rome. He spent 16 centuries viewing your kind as livestock at best, entertainment at worst. Vesemir's jaw tightened. He is not wrong that protecting you makes me vulnerable. He is simply wrong about it mattering. After dinner, I found myself unable to sleep. My daughter was restless, and my mind refused to quiet. And somewhere around midnight I wandered to the library in my borrowed robe to find Vesemir already there. He sat in a leather chair by the cold fireplace, a book open in his lap but his eyes fixed on nothing. He looked up when I entered and something in his expression shifted, surprise perhaps that I'd sought him out. "Couldn't sleep," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "She's been kicking all night." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. Mostly it's just insistent. Like she's reminding me she's there." I rested my hand on my belly, feeling the flutter of movement beneath my palm. Like she's impatient to meet the world. She'll be born into a dangerous one. She was always going to be. Even before I knew about any of this. I studied him in the low light, the sharp angles of his face, the stillness that seemed less predatory now and more like exhaustion. "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask anything." "Does it get lonely? Watching everyone around you die while you stay the same?" The silence stretched long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yes. He closed his book, set it aside. "The first century is the hardest. You lose everyone you knew before. Family, friends, lovers. You tell yourself you'll form new connections, that immortality will mean endless opportunities for companionship. But humans burn so bright and so briefly. After a while you stop letting yourself get close. It hurts less." His eyes found mine and something raw moved behind them. I have not allowed myself to care about a human in over 200 years. Until now. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "I stayed with Jack for 2 years, I said quietly. Everyone thought I was weak. Stupid. A woman too desperate for love to see what was right in front of her. I pulled my robe tighter, suddenly cold despite the warm night. But I stayed because I thought I could fix him. Because I believed that if I loved him enough, tried hard enough, he would become the person I knew he could be." "And when did you realize he couldn't be fixed?" "When I told him I was pregnant and his first response was to ask how much an abortion would cost." My voice didn't waver. I'd had months to make peace with this particular wound. That was the first time I chose myself over him. The first time I refused to sacrifice something that mattered to me for someone who had never sacrificed anything for me. Vesemir leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "You stayed because you're brave," he said softly. "Leaving would have been easier. Giving up on someone, accepting that they're beyond help, that requires nothing. Staying, hoping, fighting for something you believe in even when everyone tells you you're wrong." He shook his head slowly. "That requires extraordinary courage. Even when it fails." No one had ever framed it that way. No one had ever suggested that my years with Jack were anything other than weakness, foolishness, a woman too damaged to recognize danger. I opened my mouth to respond. The window exploded inward. Glass rained across the library like glittering knives, and figures poured through the opening. 3, 4, 5 shapes moving too fast to track, their eyes reflecting red in the darkness. I screamed, throwing my arms over my belly as Vesemir launched from his chair with a speed that made the attackers look slow. He caught the first one by the throat mid-leap and twisted. The crack of breaking bone cut through my scream. He threw the body into the second attacker, sent them both crashing into a bookshelf that collapsed under the impact. The third reached for me. Vesemir was there. Between us. His hand closed around the attacker's wrist and with a sound like tearing cloth he ripped the arm free. I watched the Vampire King fight and it was nothing like the movies. No elegance, no choreography. It was brutal, efficient, controlled savagery that ended in seconds. Bodies lay scattered across the library floor and Vesemir stood among them, his white shirt splattered with blood that wasn't his own. One of the attackers was still moving. A girl, she couldn't have been older than 20 when she was turned, her face a mask of terror as Vesemir approached. "Please," she gasped. "I didn't know. They told me it was a simple extraction. I didn't know whose estate." Vesemir crouched beside her and I expected violence. Expected the same brutal efficiency he'd shown the others. Instead he spoke softly. "Who sent you?" The Valdress. Serafina herself. But I didn't know, I swear I just needed the money, I've only been turned for 6 months. Go. Vesemir straightened. Tell Serafina that the next team she sends won't receive mercy. Tell her the human is under my protection, and I will burn her coven to ash before I let her take what's mine. The girl fled through the broken window, vanishing into the night. Vesemir turned to face me. Blood stained his collar, his hands, the sharp line of his jaw. His eyes still held that predatory light, the monster barely leashed beneath the surface. Are you hurt? His voice was rough. I was shaking. My entire body trembling with adrenaline and terror and something else I couldn't name. But I didn't run. Didn't scream. Didn't look away from the blood on his hands. What happens now? I asked. He stared at me. Something like wonder crossed his features. Wonder and confusion and the beginning of something that looked almost like hope. You should be terrified, he said. I am. My voice steadied. But I'm more tired of being powerless than I am afraid. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopped just short of touching me, his bloodied hands hovering at his sides. Allison Hunter, he breathed. What are you? Someone who's done running. And I meant it. The Midnight Concord was the oldest vampire tradition in the Southern Territories, a gathering held every decade where the great families renewed their oaths of loyalty to the throne. Vesemir had considered canceling my attendance a dozen times. I'd refused a dozen times. If I hide, I'd told him the night before, my hand resting on the swell of my belly where my daughter had grown impossibly larger in the weeks since the library attack. They win. They prove I'm something to be protected rather than someone who chooses to stand beside you. He'd looked at me with that expression I'd come to recognize. Frustration and admiration and something deeper he still wouldn't name aloud, and finally nodded. I should have listened to his instincts. The Concord was held in an abandoned cathedral on the edge of the French Quarter, its stained glass windows replaced with dark panels that blocked the moonlight. Hundreds of vampires filled the nave, their pale faces turned toward the altar where Vesemir sat in a throne that looked older than the building itself. I stood beside him, 8 months pregnant in a deep crimson gown Margot had chosen. My presence a statement neither of us needed to explain. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Oaths were sworn, blood was exchanged in rituals I didn't fully understand, and I allowed myself to believe we might actually survive the evening unscathed. Then I saw Jack. He stood near the cathedral's rear entrance, swaying slightly, his eyes finding mine across the crowded nave with the desperate intensity of a drowning man. He shouldn't have been able to enter. The Concord was invitation only, warded against uninvited guests both human and supernatural. Unless someone had invited him. The attack came from everywhere at once. Vampires I'd assumed were loyal suddenly turned, their movements coordinated, their target clear. Hands grabbed my arms before I could scream and something pressed against my mouth. Cloth soaked in a substance that made my limbs go heavy, my vision swim. I heard Vesemir roar, heard the sounds of combat erupt through the cathedral, and then darkness swallowed everything. I woke in chains. Not metaphorical chains. Actual iron shackles binding my wrists to a stone wall in a room that smelled like mold and old blood. My daughter kicked frantically against my ribs, responding to my terror, and I forced myself to breathe. She's awake. The woman who emerged from the shadows was beautiful in the way poisonous flowers were beautiful. Dark hair cascading past her shoulders, skin like porcelain, lips stained a red that had nothing to do with cosmetics. She moved with the fluid grace of something that had been hunting since before my ancestors had language. Allison Hunter. She smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the torchlight. I am Serafina. And I have waited a very long time to meet you. The Valdress Coven. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Vesemir will come for me. Oh, I'm counting on it. Serafina circled me slowly, her gaze fixed on my belly. The great Vesemir Kahir, abandoning his throne, his territory, his carefully cultivated political alliances. All for a human woman carrying a child that isn't even his. It's almost romantic, really. What do you want? The same thing I've wanted for 1,000 years. The crimson threshold. Her eyes gleamed with something that looked like religious fervor. Your child will open doors that have been closed since before your pitiful civilization learned to write. We simply need the key. She's just a baby. She is a bridge between worlds. A vessel for power your limited human mind cannot comprehend. Serafina stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell the copper on her breath. Your grandmother glimpsed this power. Your father sensed it. But your daughter will wield it. And when she does, I will be there to guide her hand. Over my dead body. Serafina laughed. That can certainly be arranged. After the child is born, of course. We need you alive for a few more weeks. She turned away, gesturing to someone I couldn't see. Bring him. Jack stumbled through the doorway, shoved forward by hands I couldn't identify. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, gaunt, hollow-eyed, trembling with withdrawal and fear. His gaze found mine, and something that might have been shame flickered across his ruined features. Allison. You led them to me. The realization settled into my chest like ice. At the Concord. You were the invitation. They said they'd clear my debts. They said no one would get hurt. You sold me. My voice cracked. You sold your own daughter. Serafina watched our exchange with evident satisfaction. Humans are so predictable. Offer them enough and they'll betray anyone. Even their own blood. Something stirred in my chest. Not anger. Something deeper. Something that had been sleeping my entire life, waiting for a moment like this. My grandmother's gift. My dormant bloodline. The sight that had been dismissed as superstition for 3 generations. I felt it awaken like a match striking in darkness. Get away from me. My voice came out wrong, layered, resonant, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. The chains around my wrists began to glow. Serafina's smile faltered. What? Light erupted from my skin. Not soft light, not gentle light. Blazing, burning light that sent Serafina staggering backward with a scream of genuine pain. The chains shattered. The vampires guarding the door collapsed, clawing at eyes that smoked and blistered. I didn't understand what I was doing. Didn't know how to control it. But my daughter kicked beneath my heart and something ancient responded. A shield of instinct, a wall of protection that had been waiting generations to be born. Hold her. Serafina shrieked, recovering faster than the others. The child, get the child. The wall exploded inward. Vesemir came through the rubble like a force of nature, his face a mask of cold fury, his hands already slick with blood. Behind him, Margot and a dozen loyal vampires poured into the chamber, and what followed was less a battle than an execution. I watched through the fading light still radiating from my skin as Vesemir tore through Serafina's forces with brutal efficiency. Watched Margot snap the neck of a vampire twice her size. Watched the Valdris Coven's centuries of planning crumble in minutes. Jack tried to run. Vesemir caught him by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand, his eyes burning with something that looked very much like ancient rage. You sold her, Vesemir said quietly. You sold your own child. Please. Jack's voice was a strangled whisper. Please, I didn't mean. Vesemir looked at me. The question was silent but clear. I could have said yes. Could have watched the man who had destroyed my life, who had sold me and my daughter to monsters, die at the hands of the monster who had saved us. Instead I said, let him go. Vesemir's eyes widened slightly. Allison. He's not worth your hands. I met Jack's terrified gaze and felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, not even satisfaction. Just nothing. He's not worth mine. Let him live knowing he's nothing. Let him spend whatever miserable years he has left remembering what he threw away. Vesemir held Jack for one moment longer. Then he dropped him, letting him crumple to the floor like discarded trash. If I ever see you again, Vesemir said, I will not ask her permission. Jack fled. I didn't watch him go. 3 months later I stood in the nursery Vesemir had built. Soft green walls and white furniture and a window overlooking the gardens where jasmine bloomed year-round. My daughter slept in my arms, impossibly small, impossibly perfect, her tiny fist curled against my chest. I heard him before I saw him, the soft sound of footsteps stopping at the threshold. I turned to find Vesemir standing in the doorway, ancient and uncertain, waiting for permission to enter the room. I'd seen this man tear through enemies without hesitation. Watched him command a territory that spanned 1,000 miles. Yet here he stood, afraid to cross a threshold because a human woman held a sleeping infant. "You can come in," I said softly. He crossed the room like he was approaching something sacred, stopping beside me to gaze down at the baby in my arms. His expression held wonder, raw, unguarded wonder that transformed his terrible beautiful face into something almost human. "She has your stubbornness," he said. "She refused to sleep until you sang to her. She has your eyes." It was true. My daughter's eyes, open now, gazing up at both of us with preternatural awareness, were the color of aged whiskey, shot through with something that might have been gold. Something old had awakened in her. Something that connected her to the man standing beside us in ways neither of us fully understood. Vesemir reached out, hesitant, and my daughter's tiny hand closed around his finger. She held on with surprising strength, and something broke in his expression. Walls crumbling, centuries of isolation dissolving in the grip of an infant who didn't know enough to be afraid of monsters. "What do we do now?" I asked. He looked at me, at us, and for the first time since I'd met him he smiled without shadows. "We raise her," he said. "We protect her. And we build something worth protecting." Outside, the New Orleans night glittered with danger and possibility. The Valdres Coven was broken but not destroyed. Counselor Ashford still plodded in the shadows. The Crimson Threshold remained sealed, its secrets still hidden, its power still waiting. But inside this room, with my daughter in my arms and a 400-year-old vampire looking at us both like we were the first sunrise he'd seen in centuries, none of that mattered. For the first time in my life, Allison Hunter was exactly where she chose to be. And that, I was learning, was the only power that truly mattered. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed Allison and Vesemir's story, don't forget to click that subscribe button, like the video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories like this one to you. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.